everybody, and welcome back to my channel. I'm Vivian Asimos. If you are new around here, I'm a researcher and a writer. But today is not about me. Today is about some of the lovely books I have been reading recently. It is a fiction roundup of all of the books that I read in August and September. Now, in September, I partook in the Magical Readathon, which is a kind of D&D character creation style thing, but then you read books to progress them. It's kind of complicated. I don't know why I picked that as my first readathon I would partake in. Technically, I was supposed to read 7 items for that. However, 3 of them, I read shorter versions of things. So I read a short story, I read the academic equivalent of a short story, which is journal article, and then I also read a manga. We are not going to be talking about those today. So we have a grand total of 6 books to discuss today. So let's get into it. First up in August, we have The ABC Murders by Agatha Christie. It's another Agatha Christie. For those of you who are new to the channel, it has become my life mission to both own and read every single Agatha Christie book ever published. There is, I think, 99 of them. I have currently read 14. 2 of those are going to be discussed today. So the ABC Murders was definitely on that list. This is a very classic Christie novel. It's one of the biggins if you're going to be reading her. So even if you're not planning on reading every Agatha Christie ever published like I am, I do think the ABC Murders is worthwhile. It's very difficult to do a serial killer in mystery novels. In my experience of reading them, I find that they fail on a lot of levels. You kind of need to have time with a particular murder in order to sink your teeth into it. I think Christie does a pretty good job with it. The last one, I think, sometimes fails a little bit, but I understand why. But other than that, I think it's really good, and it's probably the kind of serial killer done well, especially in such a short novel. Agatha Christie books tend to not be very long. I think I read this over the course of just a couple of days. Yeah, it's 267 pages, and my copy at least has some quite big print. It's not a very long book, so to be able to allow yourself to sink your teeth into, 3+ murders is actually pretty good. I really love a Christie, love a Poirot. This was no exception to that. I think that's enough said on the ABC Murders. So, next up in August, I read Meddling Kids by Edgar Quintero. This is a horror novel. The idea is that it's based on kind of a kid detective group who encountered something a bit unexpected, weird, creepy when they were kids. It has kind of affected them as they moved forward. And now that they are young adults, I would say, they're like in their early 20s, they decided to go back to the town where they would kind of do this summer detective-ing and try to figure out what exactly happened. So this is a little bit more following kind of a play on the Enid Blyton Famous Five rather than Scooby-Doo, for context of like where Edgar Quintero is kind of drawing from. Although I think there's quite a lot of similarities. I personally haven't read any of the Famous Five books. They weren't really that big in America when I was there, but granted, it's been like 10 years since I lived in America, so I don't know if they're bigger now, but at least for me growing up, they weren't something that I encountered really ever until I moved to the UK. But regardless of where the intention was being drawn from, I was really interested in the premise of this. I was really drawn in by it. I thought it was such a fun way of tackling this kind of topic, of putting your own little spin on it. I was kind of wishing that there was a bit more of a mystery element to it. I don't know if that's less of a thing in the Famous Five. For at least Scooby-Doo, it at least has the illusion of mystery. Do you know what I mean? So I was kind of hoping for at least an illusion of mystery, but to me it was just kind of more a straight up horror novel. which isn't necessarily a bad thing. I did really enjoy this book. I find sometimes that premises can kind of live and die very quickly if like they're not followed through with properly, but I think this one was followed through with properly. I did enjoy it quite a lot. Those were the only 2 books I read in August because the last like week or so of August I spent prepping for the Magical Readathon to start in September, getting the books together, figuring out what the hell was going on with it because it's weirdly over the top and complicated from the setup. But once I was able to sort through it, it wasn't too bad. But as I said, I had to read 7 items for my thing, but I read, of those 7 items, 4 of them were books. So let's get into what those were. So the first was The Devil and the Dark Water by Stuart Turton. Now, I have talked about Stuart Turton on this channel in these wrap-ups before. I have actually read Devil and the Dark Water prior to this. In fact, this was the very first Stuart Turton book I picked up and that I read. However, I picked it up at a time where I was wanting to get into reading a bit more than I was at that time. So I picked it up. I did enjoy it at that time, but it was very, very slow going. So by the time I finished the book, I'd kind of forgotten a lot of the details presented at the beginning of the book because it had just taken such a long time to read through. So now that I've read the other Stuart Turton book, the other 2 Stuart Turton books that have come out, I wanted to return to this and give it a little bit more of a proper read. And I'm really glad I did. While I did know the ending, it was actually really nice to go through and read it knowing that, to be able to kind of pick up on those nuances that normally you only pick up on a second read of any kind of mystery. This book takes place in, I think, about like the 1600s ish, roundabout there. It's on a ship going from around Indonesia area to the Netherlands. There is a kind of Sherlock Holmes-esque character on it called Samuel Pepys. He's like the one that solves a load of crimes. He has his companion who's a bit of like an army veteran who kind of stands by him but is actually also rather smart, but like normal people smart. They are loaded on the ship. However, Samuel Pepys, our Sherlock Holmes character, has been arrested for some mysterious unknown reason at the start of the book. So when mystery happenings start happening on the ship, including, before they board, a leper cursing the passage of the ship before suddenly dying, it is up to Errant, who is the Samuel Pepys Watson character. It's up to him to solve the crime alongside some other unlikely duos for that time period, including Sarah Vessel, who is a woman and the wife of a very important figure there, and her daughter. Women are typically, especially in the 1600s, in Western society, were not really given a lot of power. So we have this kind of collection of people who traditionally do not have much power and influence trying to solve a crime. And I did really like it. I'm really happy that I reread it. I think it was definitely, it's one of my favorite Stuart Turton books. I think of the 3, it's probably my absolute favorite. I think the mystery structure is better than Evelyn Hardcastle. While I think, what is it called? The third one that just came out, The Murder at the End of the World. While that one, I think the mystery structure is even better. You can tell that he's definitely improving with each book. I'm never going to be as much of a fan of a post-apocalyptic setting as I am a ghost ship. I mean, it's hard to beat a ghost ship in the 1600s in my brain. It's just what I love. I love the mixture of kind of a horror / supernatural mystery ghost ship thing. It's just a really fun combination, and yeah, I'm really glad that I reread it and gave it its due. It's definitely one of my favorite books. All right, and then we have another Agatha Christie. I picked another Agatha Christie because I had to read a lot of books. I find Agatha Christie books pretty quick to go through. This was no exception to that. This is The Mystery of the Blue Train by Agatha Christie. Another Christie, another Poirot. In this one, a rich heiress is found dead and robbed on the Blue Train. Embroiled in affairs and a potential divorce, there are several people to point to, and it is up to Poirot to solve the case. It's definitely not one of the more classic Christies, I think, but it's not one of the worst ones that I've read. I think it's pretty good. I had a good time. I thought it was enjoyable. I thought the mystery was interesting. I think that was kind of it. I mean, it's pretty solid. I think that it's definitely worth a read if you find it at like a charity shop or something. But if you've never read Christie before, I probably wouldn't put it as like my first offering to you. All right, and the next one is The Tethered Mage by Melissa Caruso. I read this one from the library, so I do not have a hard copy to present to you. This book is a fantasy novel. It's in the world of Rivera, magic is rare and heavily controlled. Zara is born on the streets, but has a rare and powerful magic. Fate brings her to Lady Amalia, an heiress born in one of the most powerful families of the Empire. Can the unlikely pair stop war from breaking out before Zara's powers are used to crumble a city to ash? So I wasn't a big fan of this book, and I think part of that is poor marketing, which is not the writer's fault by any means. When I was searching for a book, this needed to fit a particular prompt, and when I was looking for books to fit that prompt, I found this one, as well as many others, and I was checking to make sure they weren't young adult fantasy novels. I don't have any problem with young adult fantasy novels existing or anything like that, don't get me wrong, but young adult isn't just the audience that they hit. There's also a particular style to the book that fits a YA framework. Unfortunately, if it is not geared towards that audience but is written in a similar format, it probably won't be counted as YA. As far as I'm aware, this book was not counted as YA, at least in every way that I could try to figure that out. It was not marked as YA. However, it was written like a YA novel, and I'm not a big fan of YA novels, not because of the audience. Again, it's not because of what it's geared to, but rather the style that I'm not a big fan of. So that's why I was checking to make sure it wasn't a YA novel. Unfortunately, I think it kind of is geared to that. If you are somebody who really enjoys reading YA novels, I know there's a lot of you out there, then you probably would really love this book. It just wasn't for me, and I think it's an issue. I always hate when I get books like this where it's like, I can totally see someone really loving this book. It just wasn't for me, and it's a shame that it wasn't more marked for me, because otherwise I probably wouldn't have picked it up. It just, the writing style that is typical of this kind of genre it wasn't my favorite. It was really difficult for me to get through the first 100 pages. I always give a book 100 pages before I DNF it, unless like there's something catastrophically terrible about it. But I normally try to give at least 100 pages, because sometimes writers just really struggle with the setup. But then once you're past that, you can kind of get into a rhythm with it. And that's kind of what happened with this one. After the first 100 pages, it got a lot easier for me to read, just because the exposition in my mind wasn't very well written or presented. But again, it was presented in a very YA fashion. So, I can't really fault anyone for that. If you're fitting that style, that's the style that you're writing. Like, that's not really any particular fault. Sorry, it wasn't my favorite. It wasn't a bad book by any stretch of the imagination, but it just wasn't my favorite. It wasn't for me. Sorry. And last but not least, we have Tress of the Emerald Sea by Brandon Sanderson. This is my first foray into Brandon Sanderson. I'm not really sure if it was a good, accurate first pickup of him. The writing style in this was really interesting. But first, I should tell you what it's about. Tress has only known a simple life on her rocky island home in the Emerald Sea and was actually happy to stay. But when her friend... Oops! Sorry, gotta go check on Brad. Ooh, I may have slightly burned a babka. Oh well. Right. Tress has only known a simple life on her rocky island home in the Emerald Sea and was actually happy to stay, but when her friend Charlie is taken away and disaster strikes, Tress stows away and sets out on a dangerous trip to find her friend. I really loved this book. I will definitely give more readings to Brandon Sanderson. I recognize that this writing style is probably rather different than his other books, but there's probably stuff that will carry over to it. The writing style in this book in particular reminds me quite a lot of like Douglas Adams. It's kind of like a Douglas Adams meets the kind of idea behind a series of unfortunate events where like the narrator is also a part of the story in a way. But with the wit and presentation style of Douglas Adams. I really loved it. I thought it was great. I know that that's probably not how his like high fantasy books go, but I think that there's also elements of the writing that would carry over to that. I find that it had a lot of really simple writing, but not in a way that is simple, if that makes sense. I always like to talk about how writing, you shouldn't see sweat in your writing. Like, I shouldn't see the effort that you're putting into it. And sometimes simple writing can be just as beautiful and effective because you're not seeing the sweat. It's kind of like cooking, right? It's like when you're given a Victoria sponge, for example, or like a really basic cake, there's nowhere to hide from it. You have to be really good at baking and you have to know how to make a sponge in order to present a really good Victoria sponge. You can have a really tasty, big, fancy, crazy meal, like kind of cake, but if you don't know how to make a simple sponge, there's always going to be something missing in it. And I find Brandon Sanderson, at least this book, I can't speak for the other ones yet, but at least this book, it feels like a Victoria sponge of writing. And I just love that. Yeah, I really liked it. It's kind of like a adventure, but coming of age, but also more like, not really coming of age, more as coming into yourself, which can be coming of age, but I think sometimes we think of that as only being of a particular age, but really it's not. It can be of any age that you can experience something like that. And that was definitely, I think, some of the sentiment I found in this. I just really enjoyed it. It was also just beautiful. The front was beautiful. There's also like the sections denoting the different parts was beautiful. There's artwork around the chapter titles that is beautiful. I just really loved this book. I really did. So I'll definitely be giving Brandon Sanderson a little bit more reading. I know. Who knew that a very big time famous best-selling author would be good at it? But anyway, that's us done for today. If you do want to know more about me and what I'm writing and stuff like that, you can go check out my channel where I do writing vlogs and research vlogs and talk a little bit about what I'm working on at the time. I have a new book out called Cosplay and the Dressing of Identity, which is an anthropological study of cosplay. You can go buy that now because it's out and available in all major bookstores. You can check out my other channel, Incidental Mythology, which is where I do video essays on mythology and popular culture. Do all the YouTube things. If you liked this, give it a like. Let me know what kind of stuff you've been reading. If you are a fan of Brandon Sanderson, I am aware that he has quite a catalog of books. Let me know where you would suggest somebody newly getting into that to start. That would be of really great use to me. But that being said, thank you so much for being here and listening to me and enjoying your own reading, and I will see you next time. Bye!